My name is Roseanne Burke, and I am the Manager of Advocacy at the Alzheimer Society of Nova Scotia. We would like to acknowledge we are in Mi'kmaq, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq Nation. We are all treaty people. The Alzheimer Society is committed to creating collaborative and respectful relationships. Together, our goal is to identify and develop tools that align with the beliefs and needs of Indigenous, African Nova Scotian, Acadian, and all equity-deserving communities across our province. We are committed to walk as community members and allies in the elimination of racism and discrimination. January is Alzheimer's Awareness Month. During this month, we at the Alzheimer Society of Nova Scotia encourage Nova Scotians to learn more about dementia. This year, our awareness campaign focused on 10 ways to reduce your risk of dementia. These are 10 actions that you can take at any age or stage of your life to improve your brain health and reduce your risk of dementia. These vital steps for improving brain health can also be helpful for people living with dementia. We want to empower Nova Scotians to take an active role in your own brain health. Together, we can reduce our risk, and it's important that we each take 1 or 2 small steps to do so. Small steps can make a big difference. Furthermore, for more than 40 years, the Alzheimer Society of Nova Scotia has been providing information, education, and support to all Nova Scotians impacted by dementia. On that note, while Alzheimer's disease is the most common type of dementia, there are other types as well. Although our name is the Alzheimer Society of Nova Scotia, we support all Nova Scotians affected by many different types of dementia, not only Alzheimer's disease. Lewy body dementia, for example, is another common type of dementia that we support. Today is the 2nd annual World Lewy Body Dementia Day. We are committed to sharing information and awareness about all dementias. To provide sufficient support to all people affected by dementia and support risk reduction at a population level, we must think differently. Today, there are an estimated 16,000 people living with dementia in Nova Scotia. By 2050, it is projected that there will be an increase to 28,000 Nova Scotians who will be living with dementia. We need to work in new ways to prepare for the future and influence change. So, we're excited to announce that we have invested in a new research and advocacy department that will improve our capacity for work in these areas and promote further discussions around brain health and innovation. We'll expand upon work we've long been doing, including risk awareness, creating dementia-friendly communities, fostering promising research, and supporting our government partners. As well, this new department will be further focused on supportive government advocacy, research and knowledge translation, timely, culturally appropriate diagnosis, and community-level education and awareness of dementia. Now, for a few housekeeping items before I introduce our speakers. This evening, we are hosting a hybrid event with nearly 300 people joining us both in person and online. The event recording will also be available for viewing and sharing after the event tonight. To our virtual audience, if at any point you're having trouble, our support staff are here to help. A few housekeeping details for those in the room. The washrooms are in the hallway to the left as you exit the auditorium. Masks are available should you wish to have one. Thank you for helping us to have a successful and safe event. Thank you to Basil Audiovisual, our producer for this evening, and the Woodlawn Public Library for hosting us. Now, please take a moment to put your phones on silent. We will get started with our main event. I'm pleased to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Jasmine Mah. Dr. Mah is a physician and researcher who cares for older adults in geriatric medicine. She holds an MD from the University of Ottawa and a Master of Science from the London School of Economics and the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, and a PhD from Dalhousie University. Dr. Mah is a Canadian Medical Association Young Leader, recipient of the Association of Faculties of Medicine Learner Changemaker Award, and winner of Dalhousie University's 3-minute thesis. She firmly believes in equipping others with the knowledge and skills to succeed in advocating for their needs. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Mah.
Hello. Okay. Hi, everyone. It is a pleasure to be here today to talk about medications in dementia. So a little bit of a disclosure. I actually was a previous recipient of the Alzheimer Society of Nova Scotia Phyllis Horton Research Award, so I am thrilled to be back. And I am also an employee of Nova Scotia Health as a resident and the co-founder of Let Science Connect. So the talk will be in 3 pieces today. We'll do a brief overview of dementia so that we're all on the same page. We'll talk about current medications available, and then we'll spend the majority of our time talking about upcoming medications. So as you're probably all aware, dementia is a big umbrella term. It's a big catch-all term for diseases of the brain that cause a variety of symptoms. So whether that's memory, whether that's changes in mood, difficulties with thinking, difficulties with problem solving, difficulties with language, it's all under this big umbrella if they affect people's day-to-day lives. The synonym for that in medicine is major neurocognitive disorder. So this comes from the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual by the American Psychiatric Association called the DSM-5. And according to the DSM-5, there are 4 main things to be diagnosed with a dementia. 1, evidence of significant cognitive decline from previous level of performance in 1 or more cognitive domains. That these changes in the way you think interfere with independence in everyday activities, that it's not caused by a sudden or transient event that will go away, that we call delirium, and it's not caused by another medical or psychiatric issue. According to the DSM-5, there are 6 different domains of cognitive thinking. So the first one is complex attention. So some people have difficulties going from one task and then multitasking to do another. And that is one area that could be affected. Language, difficulties getting out the words, but also difficulties understanding words. There's something called executive dysfunction or function, and that's that ability to plan. So I know what I need to go get from the grocery store in order to make dinner 3 days from now. There's perceptual motor, also known as visual spatial, when people get lost or they put things in different places. Social cognition, this is kind of that feeling when you say mom's not herself anymore, she doesn't have that get up and go. There's something we called apathy or disinhibition or the lack of empathy. And then the prototypical Alzheimer's difficulties with language and memory. As Roseanne alluded to, there are many different types of dementia. Alzheimer's is the one that's most common and the one we think about the most, but there are vascular dementias, dementia with Lewy body, frontal temporal, and many actually other things that can cause the symptoms of dementia as well. And you might have a little bit of Alzheimer's and a little bit of Lewy body, a little bit of Alzheimer's, a little bit of vascular, and we call this mixed. For today's talk, we'll mainly focus on Alzheimer's. So current medications. I know this looks like a complex slide, but I'm going to walk you through it, because I think if we think about what causes Alzheimer's dementia, it helps us understand the medications we have and the medications that we're going to have. So what causes Alzheimer's? The true answer is that we don't know, but there's a lot of smart researchers working on this, so hopefully we'll have an answer one day. But there's three main hypotheses, and of course there's other hypotheses on the right that we're also working on. So on the left here, we've got the cholinergic hypothesis. That is the idea that if your brain doesn't have enough of a neurotransmitter called acetylcholine, that causes difficulties in memory, thinking, language, sleep, etc. The second one is the amyloid hypothesis, one that you might have heard before. Amyloid is a protein in your body. When a specific type of this protein, amyloid beta, kind of gets misshapen and misfolds and aggregates, so clumps together into your brain, this causes disruption in your nerves and sometimes can lead to nerve death in the brain. The tau hypothesis is also a very well-known hypothesis. So tau is another type of protein. This tends to accumulate in clumps and affect the communication along a brain nerve cell. And then again, the end product is leading to inflammation, death of brain cells. So the first class of medications we're going to talk about is based on this hypothesis, the cholinergic hypothesis. So in a healthy brain, there are neurons that are always communicating. And in any communication, you need a sender, so that's the nerve cell at the top, a receiver, the nerve cell at the bottom with the little receptors in yellow, and then you need the message or the messenger. So that's the acetylcholine. That is the neurotransmitter. Now on the right there, the little Pac-Man guy, so that is an enzyme called acetylcholinesterase. It removes the acetylcholine from that space because our body always wants to be in balance. So we can't have too much of acetylcholine, but we can't have too little. And the cholinergic hypothesis says that it's the too little that is causing some of the symptoms of dementia. And we know in a normal brain, that's the top left here, it's nice and full. But when we look at brains that have dementia, we see death of neurons, which when you get a CAT scan or you look on the brain after death, an autopsy, there's shrinkage in those nerve cells. And the bottom is kind of a little bit of a depiction of if we were looking at a cell level, so the cells on the bottom right, those have died. So the first category of medications we currently have are called the cholinesterase inhibitors, donepezil, rivastigmine, and galantamine. And these work by blocking Pac-Man. They basically block the thing that is breaking down acetylcholine. So they allow this messenger to build up in an atmosphere in dementia where there isn't enough of it. And this actually does also explain why we use them in early dementia. So it's increasing this messenger in the brain, but it can't create new neurons. So you're essentially just you're telling the neurons that are there to work harder. And the thought is by having more acetylcholine, that is what helps with the symptoms of dementia. So again, cholinesterase inhibitors do not cure, they do not stop progression of dementia. They essentially increase the level of neurotransmitter, and as we talked about, they're recommended in early or mild Alzheimer's because of the fact that you're really stimulating the nerves that are still there, and they're not as effective when the nerves have died. It is Health Canada approved, and in general, when I see patients in clinic, I would say about a third of people respond. So the question is, in a medication that doesn't cure, what is a response? So the studies have showed that there might be a slightly decreased decline, I know that was a double negative, in cognitive test scores. There might be a little bit of improvement in behavior. there might be an overall global impression when you ask families and people living with dementia that things are better. That's what the studies show that these medications might do. But the problem is a third will have side effects. So I've looked at systematic reviews, which is a type of research that kind of pools all the research we know about a topic, and this is up to. So it can be a lot less than this, but these are up to the highest estimates. And you can see nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, anorexia, so not hungry, insomnia or dreams. That's why we often recommend giving the Nepazil in the morning instead of at night, because it can cause that. Headaches, syncope, dizziness, and of course we don't give it to people with heart blocks. So the side effects, it's up to 1 in 5 for nausea for donepezil. They're not insignificant. Another question that I get in clinic is, so if I have a different type of dementia, will these work? Because these have been studied in Alzheimer's. Again, these are the results of 2 systematic reviews that took all the evidence that answers that question. So if you have a diagnosis of vascular dementia, the summary of the evidence says that there might be a cognitive change, but it may not be clinically relevant. And we'll come back to that idea later. And then in a second review in dementia with Lewy bodies and Parkinson's disease, it actually does show that there's some similar response in Parkinson's disease dementia, a little bit less clear in Lewy body dementia, but anecdotally, if people have Lewy body dementia with visual hallucinations, a cholinesterase inhibitor might help that quite a bit. A really quick 2 slides on a different class of medication that is available in Canada is called memantine. So glutamate is another neurotransmitter, like acetylcholine. This one also has a role in memory and thinking. But in a brain with Alzheimer's, there's too much glutamate. Glutamate acts on that blue receptor, NMDA, and sends calcium into the next cell. That actually overexcites the cell, and the cell has inflammation or dies. So if we block that receptor, even though there's too much glutamate, then the cells may not be as inflamed or as damaged. And so that is memantine, which is an NMDA receptor blocker. Again, doesn't stop or cure dementia. It is Health Canada approved. You can't get it in Nova Scotia unless you have private insurance, and there are some side effects as well. And when we put all the studies together, there is a small clinical benefit of memantine in people with moderate to severe Alzheimer's, but there's no benefit in mild dementia, so hard to say. Okay, so upcoming medications. This is when we get to the amyloid hypothesis. So 1906, Dr. Alzheimer, he studies the brain of Auguste Dieter, who was a woman who came in to the hospital with symptoms of dementia. And when he looked under a microscope at her brain when she died, he saw these abnormal clumps that were in the brain instead of where neurons should be. And he called this, he wasn't sure what this was. So 80 years later, this was identified as the amyloid beta plaques. But up until 2004, the only way we could study this was on autopsy or by taking a sample. So in 2004, some very smart scientists figured out how to trace this protein in the brain on imaging through PET scans. And this leads us to the controversial launch of the anti-amyloid antibodies. So a little bit of a cautious note, there's actually been medications in this class that have been under study for Alzheimer's for at least 2 decades. The ones up there that have gone through clinical trials and did not have any efficacy. These medications that you might have heard of recently are aducanumab, lecanemab, and donanemab. And these are man-made proteins that essentially work like your body's own immune system. They cross the blood-brain barrier, they connect to the amyloid plaques, and they remove them from the brain. So if the hypothesis that we talked about is that more plaques equals more dementia, then removing that should have cognitive benefit. Oh, these are the 3 medications that were not successful, my bad. And then a little bit of the aducanumab story, because this was highly controversial when it came out. So March 2019, two pharmaceutical companies, one in the United States and one from Japan who had a partnership, they ended a pair of clinical trials with aducanumab because of futility. So even if the trial had continued, they were not going to see a positive result. But then they decided to go back and look at that data. And they actually found that without publishing the results, there was some benefit, and so they went directly to the FDA in the United States and asked for approval, which they got. And so this was an accelerated approval. The process, the scientific process was in question, and the results were finally published in 2022, and there was some skepticism about that. So just to put an analogy, it's like entering a baking contest, and then when you taste your batter, you decide that neither of them are very good, so you throw the cake away. But then when the judge comes around, you decide to take one of them out of the trash and decide that this is your entry. The judges pick you as the winner without anyone else knowing why, and then the scientific community is like, okay, so what happened? So even if that cake tasted good, the lack of transparency was very kind of controversial. So controversial that the company doesn't make it anymore. Okay? So let's go to the drug that is approved in the United States. So this is lecanemab. So I've put in the little red box the questions I ask myself when I'm reading a study and trying to translate it into whether it's applicable to my patients. So the first thing was a methodologically sound scientific study. So lecanemab was published in the New England Journal of Medicine in 2022, and it was what we would consider the gold standard of randomized placebo-controlled trial, and that is to say that we are certain that this is not due to chance alone. That's why we do this type of study. So the next thing I ask, is it relevant to my patients? So it was studied in people who were 50 to 90 years old. The average age was 71. Half of them were female. It was in mild cognitive impairment, so people with cognitive changes that aren't affecting their life, or mild Alzheimer's. You had to have confirmed amyloid, either by PET scan or by markers in your cerebral spinal fluid, the fluid that surrounds the brain. And then the mean mini mental status exam score, which we sometimes use as a baseline, was 25 to 26. People who were excluded are people with strokes, mini strokes, seizures, other psychiatric issues, unstable medical conditions, and they had to have an MRI to make sure there was nothing else in the brain that could explain some of these symptoms. So the next question I asked myself, are the results that are measured relevant to my patients? The primary result was the clinical dementia rating sum of boxes scale. So this is a scale that's given to people living with dementia and their family, and they say, oh, globally, do you think things are getting better? So I've just highlighted here. This is the difference in score between the group who got the medication and the group who did not, 0.45. And you might see charts like this. So the first thing to show is that regardless of whether you got the drug or not, cognitive scores declined over time. This is over, I think, 18 months. And then it kind of looks really impressive. But the thing to remember is that on the y-axis, this line, we just saw the number. It was 0.45. And scientists have shown that on this scale, to see a difference in person, that minimally, that clinically important difference is 1 to 2. So statistically significant, whether it's clinically meaningful is a question. There were secondary outcomes as well. They looked at whether or not there was amyloid that was removed on the brain scans. They looked at other disease assessment scales, and they looked at different biomarkers. So I've put up 2 of those outcomes. Yes, amyloid was lower in the patients who got the medication on imaging. And then this is another, the ADAS-Cog3 is another score. Again, there was a statistically significant difference in that although both groups declined, the group that got the drug declined a little bit less, but the minimally clinically important difference for that scale is 4. And the difference in the results was 1.44. Now, the next question I ask is it safe for my patients? So there's a black box warning on both of these medications for amyloid-related imaging abnormalities, or ARIA. And that can happen in normal people too. It was just a lot higher in people who got this drug. So related to that is edema, which is brain swelling, effusions, which is fluid on the brain, hemorrhages, which is bleeding in the brain, and siderosis is like a deposition in the brain of things you don't want there. So a fifth of patients in the group that got the drug got ARIA. And of those, 16% were symptomatic with headaches, altered mental status, visual changes, dizziness, or seizures. So it's not an insignificant amount. The other most common reaction was actually an infusion reaction to the drug. And then the last question I ask, is it feasible? So how is the medication given? It's given IV. It's given every 2 weeks for 18 months. So you would have to get to a center and you'd have to drive there. To be qualified for this medication, you would need to get a PET scan or a lumbar puncture to see whether you have the amyloid pathology. Because of ARIA, it's recommended that you get an MRI to make sure you don't have it, because if you do have significant ARIA, then the infusions are stopped. At the 5th, 7th, and 14th doses, I don't know about you, but like I can barely get one MRI for one patient, so like to get 3 of them would be, I think, a challenge. And then the cost, of course. So I am going to skip the second medication just to know that it is there and very similar to the lecanemab in that statistically significant scores, but minimally clinical difference questionable. The one thing I wanted to show from this one actually is one of their secondary results. So they looked as a secondary result amyloid clearance. So how much amyloid was removed from the brain scans. And all of the orange bars are the people who got the drug. The tiny, tiny, tiny bars that you can barely see, that's people who didn't. So the drug did what it was supposed to do. It removed the amyloid in the brain. That's actually really impressive. The thing that we can't figure out is why it didn't lead to a bigger clinical improvement in dementia symptoms. And then when we wonder about that, we actually have to go back to the amyloid hypothesis I showed on one of the first slides. So perhaps that's not necessarily, that's on the pathway to dementia, but maybe it's not the right target. Similar adverse effects with the ARIA and the black box warning. Similar feasibility. So where are we now with this? So lecanemab was submitted on June 14th, 2024. There was a period of patient and clinician review, and then the review was initiated by Health Canada on July 2nd. The latest status is that it's still under review, although from a research perspective, they still might be enrolling people up to 69 months just to keep monitoring. Donanemab was submitted on August 28th, 2024. Interestingly, even though donanemab was submitted after CADIT, the drug, the Canadian equivalent of the FDA, they actually submitted back the report to the companies that said we need this information. So that part I didn't see for lecanemab. And the latest status is suspended because they have to wait for those for the companies to answer with those information. So that part was a bit interesting. And then there was an extension phase from a research perspective up until about 45 months. So I have gotten some people asking me, like, where can we get these drugs? So in Canada, the only places that are giving these drugs are research sites. To my knowledge, but happy to be wrong, Halifax is not one of those sites. So what I actually recommend if you're interested in learning more, so you go to clinicaltrials.gov. In the intervention treatment, put the name of the drugs we talked about today. They'll come up with a list of the trials, and under those trials are the different sites that are potentially recruiting or not, so you can see their status on that. So just take-home points. We talked about current medications, 2 classes, 4 different drugs that are used for dementia symptoms, and mainly studied in Alzheimer's. Upcoming meds, we've got the supposedly disease-modifying medications of lecanemab and donanemab. And then in terms of the future, so I just wanted to leave on just a little bit of a note of hope, because even though these medications may not be the answer to dementia, I think it's really exciting that there is interest in dementia research. There is momentum. Drug companies are interested in developing things for dementia. So I think all of that in totality is a very, very positive thing. And one of the reasons I went into geriatrics is because I think there's so much we don't know about the brain. So that means there's a whole lot to discover. And so I'm just really optimistic kind of for where this will go. And that's it.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mah, for helping us to better understand the medications available today and what we can possibly expect to see in the future. Our second speaker of the evening is Dr. Beverley Cassidy. Dr. Cassidy is a geriatric psychiatrist and assistant professor with Dalhousie University. Her clinical and academic interests include community psychiatry and the neurobiology of brain health and treatment of mood, anxiety, and cognitive disorders in later life. She leads Memory Café Nova Scotia, a provincial strategy to help enhance well-being for people living with dementia and their families. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Cassidy.
So good evening, everyone. And thank you so much to Roseanne and the Alzheimer Society for the opportunity tonight to tell you about Memory Café Nova Scotia. So I have no commercial or financial conflicts of interest to declare. I help to coordinate this project on a volunteer basis. And the title this evening is Don't Hide Away, Destigmatizing Dementia with Memory Cafés. So I thought I would start with a question to each of you. What do you or would you fear with a diagnosis of dementia? And I thought maybe just to take a moment privately to ask yourself that question. As a geriatric psychiatrist, it's sometimes my job to give people the diagnosis of dementia of one sort or another, and to think about those fears with people in the office. And the kind of fears that I hear about include things like a fear of loss of sense of oneself, a fear of loss of connection to those we care about most, to partners, family, friends, loss of sense of place, and especially a loss of sense of being part of a community in a meaningful way. If we zoom out on that and look more broadly at the expressed emotional needs of people living with dementia, that's been looked at in large groups of respondents. And here are some of the key findings. The need to feel that they continue to belong, the need for connection with others where they feel welcome, and the need for enjoyment and new experiences. So when we think about those emotional needs, really, they're the same needs as someone who does not have dementia, aren't they? So I thought, rather than talking about some of those specific needs, I would share an image with you and introduce you to this fellow. His name is Wilhelm Utermohlen, and he's an artist who painted the picture that you see behind him after he received a diagnosis of dementia, Alzheimer's subtype. And I just find it such a beautiful painting. He's seated on the couch there, if you can see the image, with the cat on his lap. And it's a very vibrant, warm scene, beautiful warm colors. And it looks like that plant's gonna like grow right out of the pot there and surround him. But also there's a circle. If you look at the people in that painting, they almost create a complete circle, including the image of a reflected image above the fireplace of someone in another room. And the boundaries between things like the table and the floor and the walls are fluid. So there's this, to me, a really amazing sense of connectedness. Now there's something kind of different over here on the left that you see. It's sort of stark white, very much in contrast to the flourishing plant that you see inside. And if we really zoom out on that painting, that's the full picture. And so this warm scene of connectedness is kind of being encroached. There's something, to me, kind of stark out there. And how precious this scene within the warmth is. So anyway, sometimes a picture is worth 1,000 words. Certainly when we look at health risks, social isolation and loneliness are very significant health risks to long-term well-being. In fact, about the equivalent of daily smoking. So we don't tend to talk about that so much. We talk quite a bit about cholesterol and blood pressure and that sort of thing, but really social isolation and loneliness is way up there as a risk, and social connectedness is way up there as a protective factor for long-term well-being for all of us. A great proponent of this, letting everyone know about this, is Dr. Vivek Murthy, and he has been the US Surgeon General for the last 5 years, and he made it one of his key mandates in the last 5 years to really let people know about this risk factor. And he wrote a beautiful book, if you're interested in reading about it, and it's very evidence-based and beautifully written, called Together, The Healing Power of Human Connection. So in many countries, we now have efforts to kind of address social isolation and loneliness. In the UK, they had a minister of loneliness. We had Vivek Murthy in the US, and in Canada, we've had social prescribing. Now, social prescribing is an interesting one if we think about cognitive impairment, because, you know, we might say, well, you know, it'd be great to get to the coffee shop. And, but if you have cognitive impairment, it might not be just so easy. For example, when someone says, well, what have you been up to? Or someone says, well, what's your plans for the weekend? Or you look at the board and you think, well, what do I really like here? Or how will I negotiate this transaction? So even the things that we might think of as a relatively, maybe everyday kind of interaction can be a challenge with cognitive impairments or memory challenges. This man, Beer Meesen, was a Dutch psychologist, and back in 1997, he decided to take matters into his own hands, and he set up in what was then Leiden, Holland, a Alzheimer's Cafe. It's a bit blurry on that picture behind him there, but he put it in blue neon lights. So this was really the first Memory Café, which was a really deliberate attempt to destigmatize dementia, to make welcoming social spaces within communities where people really felt comfortable to be present. So since then, his words have really been something that many countries of the world have now tried to carry forward, and here's what he said: "Come out of the woodwork, you're part of society, and we want you to take your part in it. Dementia is a part of life for some. You didn't ask to get it. It could happen to anybody. Don't hide away." So yeah, those words, I think, almost 30 years ago are still very relevant. The Memory Café movement has spread over the UK and Western Europe. We started our first cafe with Memory Café Nova Scotia in 2019 with a pilot cafe in the Wolfville-Kentville area. And over the past 6 years, I would say interest has really exploded in the province. We now have 13 cafes happening from Cape Breton to Yarmouth. So a really big growth of interest in the last 6 years, even in spite of COVID. So what is Memory Café Nova Scotia? It's a nonprofit multidisciplinary team seeking to promote inclusion and quality of life for persons living with dementia and care partners. It's a volunteer team. It consists of healthcare providers, municipal recreation coordinators, community volunteers, artists, musicians, and people with lived experience with dementia and their families. Some key group collaborators are the Alzheimer Society of Nova Scotia, the Art Gallery of Nova Scotia that has been very generously giving us access to some of their permanent collection for art within our cafes, Community Links, and Senior Safety Services in the province. And we're supported by a federal New Horizons grant since 2019. So rather than try to explain what happens at a memory cafe, I thought I'd show you a short video that was put together by some of the members of our Wolfville-Kentville Memory Cafe. It features John Tetro on guitar and two of our facilitators, Mary Bates and Kevin West. So maybe we'll just play that for you now.
Hi, I'm Kevin. Welcome to Memory Café Nova Scotia. You may be wondering, what is a memory cafe? Come with me and we'll have a look.
Haven't laughed just a little bit for so long.
Memory cafes are welcoming social spaces for people living with memory challenges, for their family, and for their care partners.
At Memory Cafe, everyone belongs. There's warm drinks, treats, conversation, and live music.
Hadn't felt that life was mine for so long. For too long.
The welcome is so nice. And I think that makes everybody feel at ease. And
the social interaction available from Memory Cafe has been just a big, big plus.
I like coming because there's music and things to do, and delicious food, and a chance to be out on a date without me having to do the planning. We like looking at the pictures, don't we, the Maud Lewis pictures, and describing which ones we like the best. You can't answer that question wrong, can you?
You know, the theme of art and music is great.
if you know there's music nearby, you know it's going to be a success. That's what I think. It's just going to add to the atmosphere.
Sing me an old song so I will know I'm home. Rock me in bed.
Having memory trouble is no obstacle to having a good time at a memory cafe.
If you are living with memory challenges or dementia, we invite you to join us. Memory cafes are found all over the province, and registration is free. Contact information is right here on our website, memorycafens.ca. We'd love to see you.
Thank you.
So I'd really like to thank John Hillis from Truffaut Films for helping us put that together. And hopefully it gave you a bit of a sense of what happens at a memory cafe. It's really just fun. I try never to miss our local one because honestly, it's like the highlight of the week. We do have a website, which was created by David Newcomb, our website developer, and he has really helped us create a repository of free resources for anyone wanting to start a memory cafe in their community. All the resources are free. So as you could see going across the headers, there's an art and music section where artists have done some videos on how to do a clay making session or how to do silk painting. And the musicians have downloaded some tunes. So if you're looking for some music for your memory cafe, it's right here on the website. The location section highlights all the locations in the province, as well as who you could contact if you were interested in attending a memory cafe. And the Starter Cafe section is just a really practical section with these kinds of details, like what are the best practices? And we set that up with the help of the Alzheimer Society, so we're really grateful for their support in developing the guidelines for these cafes. And also we have registration forms and posters, templates to make it easy to advertise, as well as links to important partner organizations and even an international memory cafe network. That's really fun to find out what's happening in other parts of the world. Speaking of that, we have a new section called a cross-borders section where we are offering twinning and a 5-part series for people in other provinces as well. So far we've been able to share our resources in New Brunswick and Prince Edward Island and Ontario and Quebec. And most recently we had a very interesting experience after a presentation in Montreal where we had an email from Tbilisi, Georgia in the Caucasus, where they are developing a memory cafe program in their country, trying to develop social connection and quality of life for people living with dementia there. So this is a really wonderful opportunity to find out what's happening in a really different part of the world for us. So closer to home, where could you find a memory cafe near you? These are the current sites: Sydney, Cape Breton, Richmond, New Glasgow, and the New Glasgow site is absolutely fresh, just starting, so I know the recruitment and registration is wide open there. Cole Harbour, Tantallon, Chester, Bridgewater, Lunenburg, Shelburne, Argyll, Clare, Berwick, New Minas, and Wolfe-Kentville. And there's more on the way. More communities are interested in this each year. So if you would like to launch one in your community or get in touch with us, please do. info@memorycafens.ca. And thank you so much for the opportunity to share this project with you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Cassidy, on enlightening us on the importance of socialization, taking steps to remain social, and about the Memory Cafe initiative right here in Nova Scotia. I'm pleased now to introduce our third speaker of the evening, Kaylee Jurat. Kaylee is originally from the beautiful Annapolis Valley and currently lives in the Halifax regional area with her husband and 2 children. Her family has always advocated passionately for supporting dignity and quality of life for people living with dementia. She has proudly continued that tradition as a registered nurse and as the professional practice leader for elder and frailty care with Nova Scotia Health. Her mother was diagnosed with young onset Alzheimer's disease 10 years ago at the age of 51. As a family member heavily involved in supporting a person living with dementia, Kaylee has experienced firsthand the challenges of navigating complex care systems. She is honored to have the opportunity to bring personal and professional insights as a member of the Alzheimer Society's Advisory Committee of Lived Experience, and hopes that sharing her family's journey will help advance the work of the Alzheimer Society. Please join me in welcoming Kaylee.
Thank you. Hopefully everybody can hear me. I'm fairly soft-spoken, even with a microphone. Sometimes it can be a challenge, but I will do my best. So I'm here to talk a little bit about my family's journey. I really appreciate this opportunity provided by the Alzheimer Society of Nova Scotia. I feel sharing stories is a way to speak directly to people's hearts, and it's through that connection of shared emotions that we can really foster growth and change. I know that unexpected joy is not something that we often think about along the Alzheimer's journey. It can be a devastating diagnosis. I know it was for my family with my mom at her young age, and we have really learned to embrace the positive experiences that have come through this, and just really happy to talk about that with you. I chose an ocean beach theme because it's very important to my mom. My husband's from Ontario, and he teases me all the time that I'm an ocean snob, and I tell him I come by it honestly. I learn from the best. So a few of the lessons that I want to touch on for this presentation are on our story, on leaning in and letting go, being intentional, the power of community, and embracing the art of the possible. So this is a picture of me and my mom. My mom, Stephanie. So as it was mentioned in my introduction, she was diagnosed at 51, but her journey towards diagnosis started in her late 40s. I was fairly young at that time myself, in my late 20s, and wasn't an experience that we were thinking we were going to have at that point in time. My mom was diagnosed with young onset, and that does come with some of its own unique challenges in that she was physically very fit. She was an athlete, she was an avid soccer player. She wasn't in a phase of life where she felt like she should be slowing down at all. She was preparing for retirement, and it took some time to process the diagnosis when we saw the changes that were happening. And we had to advocate really strongly on her behalf with her in the healthcare system. Because of her age, people really wanted to dismiss what was going on, what we were seeing, because she knew herself really well, and because we knew her really well. We knew it was more than, just stress or just anxiety or just, being overtired from working hard and having a busy life. And it was difficult to really push through some of those conversations. And I know in the work that I do, I was very fortunate that I had connections, and I can imagine how difficult of an experience that would be for people who don't have those opportunities, who maybe have a different level of understanding about young onset Alzheimer's. But as much as we had those challenges, we also had some really positives about her being young, having a young family. We had the energy to advocate, and we had this perspective that this is not going to be the end of her story to get this diagnosis, that we're going to get through this as a family, and that's exactly what we did. So some of the things that we had to get really comfortable with was in leaning in and letting go. And what I mean about that is we had to get comfortable as care partners in letting go of who, in some ways, my mom was before this, the things that she was able to do, that shifted. And what was important to her shifted as well. And we had to kind of get on board with that and support her in what she wanted to do now. it's challenging to let go of the expectations for what they thought that phase of life was going to look like for my mom and my dad. And, you know, they were preparing for retirement. That was going to look different now. It's always been, you know, a hope and a dream of my mom. She wanted to be a grandmother, and changing how that might look, because I think we all have sort of dreams and visions for the future that we have for ourselves. And when these unexpected things come along, it disrupts where we thought we were going, and we have to kind of reset. And letting go of that, as hard as it is very freeing. We had to let go of a lot of fear, and a big barrier with our family was the fear of judgment from others, especially being somebody with young onset. For my mom, she didn't look like, you know, a socially typical person who might be living with dementia, and it was harder for people to understand when she would have like unusual responses to different situations socially. And when she's always been very open about it. She doesn't mind telling people. As a person who was very private, she's been very open about her diagnosis and sharing that and that journey with other people. And she would tell people, like, like if they would kind of look at her quizzically, if she asked a question more than one time, or she said something that was unexpected in a situation, she'd be like, you know, I have Alzheimer's. I just want to put that out there in case I said something that didn't make a lot of sense. And they would kind of laugh like she was joking. And then when they would realize that we were serious, there'd be a bit of an awkward pause. So we had to let go of other people's expectations as well, and other people's judgments, and learn to really like live life fully and forward for ourselves. And that's where the leaning in and came into play. So we really learned to lean into now, to lean into the moment that we have and the reality that we're in, and making the most of that. And part of how we did that was in learning to be intentional. And I find this has been one of like the greatest gifts for us, is that we don't take time for granted anymore. We don't take opportunities to make meaning, to make memories, and put them aside for another day. It's a lot more now about how can we make this happen than, you know, what do we need to worry about with this happening. It was really important to us as a family that it was never going to be like choosing my mom or being a part of life, being a part of family, being a part of community. It's always going to be mom and. So she is invited, engaged to determine what she wants to do for herself, what she wants to participate in, and then we would support her fully in that. And we live with fewer reservations and hesitations about doing the things. Like if there's something that we want to do that we might think like, you know, are the conditions optimal? We don't worry about that as much anymore. We're just like, let's just do it and we'll see how far we get. And if we have to turn around halfway, that's okay, because it's every step along the journey is one that can be meaningful and one that can be positive for us. And if mom changes her mind and decides this isn't something for her, like, then at least we can say we tried. If we didn't do it, then we would never know, and we would never have the opportunity for some of the amazing experiences that we've had. Another thing that's really important to my mom is she did get to be a grandmother. She has two granddaughters. So I have a 9-year-old and a 7-year-old. They're very much, you know, Grammy's girls, and she spoils them, and she would always scold me if I ever raised my voice even the slightest bit and to her grandchildren. And I would say, do you remember what it was like growing up in our house? And she's like, doesn't matter, grandkids are different. So I hear that a lot. And having the opportunity to help my mom share her story with my daughters has been a blessing, because I have gotten to know my mom at such a deep level, and I often hear that from friends of mine who are of a similar age, who say, like, they find it hard to make time for their parents, and that it's amazing how much I know about my mom, how many things I've gotten to do with my mom. Often they have gotten to be included with it too. A lot of my friends are tagging along for the adventures that we go on, because we're very intentional about taking time for adventure. We go to all the beaches. So if there's a new beach on a map that we haven't been to, then it's always gets put on the summer bucket list to get there. And it's something that my mom always expresses a lot of gratitude for, that we're willing to take her along, as she says. But I'm like, it's not about that at all. We're just so excited that you want to do these things with us, and that we're able to make the time to do it. Understanding her remaining capabilities and enhancing them as much as we can as we have gone along the journey has been a privilege. Getting to see what she is able to do and how excited that she is when she's still able to do things for herself. We often focus on losses when we talk about living with dementia. And as much as I might not understand what it's like for her living with Alzheimer's disease, I understand what it's like to feel scared. I understand what it's like to feel isolated. I understand what it's like to feel frustrated, to lack confidence. But I also understand what it's like to be spontaneous, to be joyful, to feel proud of my accomplishments. And we really focus on that aspect of the disease and really enhancing the fact that that is still very much part of her journey, is all of those positive emotions. So just a few, I could make 100 slides of the things that we've done over the years, but we celebrate birthdays with a lot of joy, as you can see. We have a traditional salsa making day every fall at my aunt's house. We have gone on boat tours of Lunenburg, and that was even just 2 summers ago. Getting her on the boat was a challenge. My dad has never been punctual. He is not good at being on time. My mom was the one who was always on time. So the man who is running the tour company was very generous and took the rest of the passengers out for a loop around Lunenburg while we waited for my dad to park the car and get my mom to the dock so that we could get her on the boat, and to see the joy on her face of being out on the ocean, which is something that she got to do a lot as a kid. Her parents were sailors and had a sailboat, and so she loves being on the water, so we got to do that tour, got to do that with my family, my husband and our kids and my brother and his girlfriend, so we always involve everybody. We go to all the petting zoos. So one of the pictures there is the Dragonfly Haven Therapeutic Farm, which I think it's moved now to Hansport. It was in, or it's in Avonport, it was in Hansport. And you know, my kids just were hysterical over how often Grammy would let the potbelly pigs out of the pen, and then they got to take the bag of apples and chase the pigs around and get them to go back in the pen. Animals are also one of her joys. Something that I often hear when I'm talking to other families who are along this journey is the balance between maintaining privacy and people wanting to protect their loved one. As I spoke to, the letting go kind of social expectations, social judgments, other people's understanding and awareness of what it can be like for somebody living life with Alzheimer's. And it can lead, like Dr. Cassidy was saying, to social isolation. And with you know, my mom taking the lead on this, we're very intentional about building community of support. So all of her family, her friends have been very engaged along this journey. They've been there for her, with us. And through letting people in, we've been able as a family to stay connected so that my dad wasn't isolated either, and that my mom continued to be able to engage meaningfully in life in a way that, that suited her and what she wanted to do. We've been able to build our resources. We are so grateful for the Alzheimer's Society at the early stages of my mom's journey, having people reaching out to us, to connect with us, to provide us with resources, to ask us what we needed, to be able to take the course for caregivers to help learn about her disease process was so helpful to us. And, you know, at our ages, my brother was in his early 20s. We didn't have a lot of people in our peer groups who were going through a similar experience. Most of my friends, even my parents' friends, were maybe just starting to see some Alzheimer's related illnesses in their like grandparents and parents. And it was difficult to feel at the beginning like we weren't alone, and the Alzheimer's Society really helped us with that and helped us gain the confidence that we needed to bring other people into our community, and to help teach them what we needed for support, so that when we would go to a family gathering, they knew it was to have a quiet space available, so that if my mom was feeling overstimulated, then we could take her and have a place to sit down. She always had her special chair by the window that looked out over the pastures down by my dad's family's farm, where she could see the water. And everybody knows what kind of music would get her up and get her dancing. So it was a help and helped us feel empowered as care partners to be able to teach others how they could support us. We create opportunities when we let people in. Because of sharing our story, we were able to do a boat trip and have the people on the boat be joyful in figuring out a way to make that opportunity possible for us. And I think that they were really glad to be able to share in that. Just this past summer, even though my mom's living in care now, that happened in November of 2023, we were grateful to take her to the beach. It's always on my bucket list to take her to the beach every summer. Set her up in a chair. We played the Beach Boys. She got up and she danced in the sand. And people came up to us and said how wonderful it was to see. And another person living with Alzheimer's, recently diagnosed, who knew my mom, they had worked together years before, approached us with a tear in her eye and said, "I have been diagnosed, and you give me hope that this is not the end of my journey." And we really want to be able to create those caring communities where everybody feels welcomed and that we are supporting each other in what we need to have those positive experiences. And I think through that sharing, we are opening hearts and minds. Another thing that we've learned to do is embracing the art of the possible. So through all of these things of being intentional, learning to let go of expectations, learning to leaning into risk sometimes, there are benefits to that, because we try not to focus on what's the worst that can happen in a situation and more on what's the best that could happen. It's important to consider those risks so that we can mitigate for them and try to plan, but we don't want that to overshadow the possibility for joy. And that was my mom on her 60th birthday, and this is 60, living with Alzheimer's, and living with Alzheimer's for quite some time. So really embrace the art of the possible. All right. Thank you for listening to our story.
Thank you, Kaylee, for sharing your very personal family story with us and providing us with hope as to how we can find the joy along the journey. Again, thank you to Dr. Mah, Dr. Cassidy, and Kaylee for your very thoughtful and inspiring presentations tonight. We'll now invite questions and comments from the audience. I will ask Dr. Mah and Dr. Cassidy to please join us on stage. We want to answer as many questions as possible for both our virtual and in-person audience members this evening. If you are in the auditorium, we have two staff members who will come to you with a microphone if you have a question, Meg and Kara. And simply raise your hand when you have a question and one of them will come to you. To ensure our event is inclusive of everyone, I kindly ask that you do please wait until you have the microphone before you ask your questions so that everyone can hear. If you are a member of our virtual audience, please send your question in the chat to our Zoom support.
Testing. This question is for Dr. Mah. You talked about treatments for Alzheimer's dementia. In North America, are there any treatments in other countries that are not available here, to your knowledge?
So I did have a slide, but I ended up skipping this one. So lecanemab and donanemab are both approved in the United States. They're also approved in Japan, which makes sense if you think about the fact that they're made by the two pharmaceutical agencies. They are actually also approved in the United Kingdom. Now, the NICE, which I cannot remember what it stands for, but it is the equivalent of our public health care, has decided in a recent review that they will not be funding these medications in the UK, even though it is approved. And I believe that the European Union in the fall had actually said no to these medications and then has revised their decision since.
Thank you, Dr. Mah.
We do have a question from online,
Oh,
if we'd
lovely.
like to go virtual.
Yes, please.
Okay, excellent. We have another one for Dr. Mah. Are there any medications that help specifically with behaviors? For example, if someone becomes angry when there's too much noise?
I am going to interpret this question as, are there any medications for responsive behaviors in dementia? So what might also be called the behavioral and psychological symptoms of dementia. As dementia progresses into more severe stages, the term responsive behavior is used because it is a response to something. Right? People with dementia are feeling bad, and even though we can't interpret, they are responding to something. And I'll also ask Dr. Cassidy to weigh in on this question after. So there is a recent BPSD guideline that has laid out what is best practices for these symptoms. And first and foremost, medications are less effective than things, so on the list is like animal therapy and robotic pet therapy, and I think massage therapy is on that list. There is exercise, of course, and there are many other non-medication therapies that have been shown to reduce those symptoms. There are also medications that are recommended by these guidelines with the caveat that there is no medication that does it well and without side effects. So I think one of the changes is the use of a medication typically used for antidepressants called SSRIs. I think citalopram, if anyone's heard of that, has made its way kind of to the top of these recommendations, mainly from a safety profile. So there is some evidence that it might help with these behaviors, but from a safety profile, it's better than the antipsychotic medications that are sometimes used, which can be necessary in dangerous situations, but come with another black box warning for death and stroke. And I might ask Dr. Cassidy as well to weigh in on this.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. The guidelines were published last year by the Canadian Coalition for Seniors' Mental Health, CCSMH. So if you go on their website, you will see all the guidelines for non-pharmacologic as well as pharmacologic treatments, and that's exactly right. Citalopram has sort of climbed onto more of a first line regarding pharmacologic treatments for their those sort of symptoms. Yeah.
Thank you both. Any questions? It looks like Kara has a
I have a question from the virtual community, and I guess this would be for Dr. Cassidy. How would you encourage somebody who is reluctant to go out and attend a memory cafe?
Well, I think people often are reluctant to go out at first. People have very mixed experiences out there in the world, and sort of that's why we entitled, this presentation Destigmatizing Dementia, because we're hoping that by creating atmospheres that are really fun and engaging, that people will see this just really as something that they would want to come to and feel very welcomed in without worrying about it being labeled or sticking out in some way. Honestly, in a memory cafe, you can't tell who might have dementia and who doesn't. Everybody was wearing a name tag. We're all sitting around having a good time. So really, I think it's just to be willing to try it. As Stephanie's so lucky to, have a family that wants to give her experiences of being included in her community, and so. Yeah, this is just one other way to try to do that. And I think once people come, then it's a lot less scary. Usually it is a good experience based on the feedback that we've gotten.
Super, thank you.
We received a few questions earlier on, and this one is for Kaylee. What would you say has been the biggest challenge for your family, and how did you address it?
I think for us, the biggest challenges were in the beginning, like finding our footing. For my mom, when she lost her driver's license, and so helping her to still feel empowered and independent, supporting her with the things that she could do, those were some of the more challenging times. It's just helping to reassure her that she is still a person who has value in society, because that's a big thing. Like, she stopped working, her work was part of her identity, driving to her meant freedom. So as those things changed, it's how can we find other ways to support her in feeling like herself, maintaining her identity. We got her a motorized scooter. She never ever used it. It has been in our garage, I think, for 9 years. But the fact that she had it helped her feel connected, that, okay, I can take that. She was riding a bike. She had a neighbor who rides a bike with her, and when she was no longer able to manage riding a bike, she was having troubles getting on and off of it, we got her an adult tricycle with a basket in it for her dog, who you saw in the video. So, so they continued riding the bike right up until the summer before she went into care. So the challenges are in being creative, being curious, and trying to problem solve. Okay, we tried this, didn't get us where we wanted to go, what else can we try? And keeping that motivation to not give up.
Just wanted to put a plug in there actually for some of the family members that are trying to come up with those creative strategies and solutions. We actually have a program at the Alzheimer Society called You First for Care Partners. So if you're interested in that, it gives the opportunity for family members to learn more about understanding behaviors and coming up with solutions. So if you're interested in that, if anybody's interested in that, go to our website or give us a call on our helpline. Thanks very much for that, Kaylee. That was super helpful.
We do have some more questions from online, if that's all right.
Perfect.
We have another one for Dr. Mah. So there are 2 treatments in the U.S. currently approved by the FDA, Kinsula and Leqembi. Are these the same as lecanemab and donanemab?
Yes.
Excellent. We have another one. Another question here is a more broad question. Is there a way to prevent Alzheimer's?
So typically we suggest brain healthy activities for everyone that have some evidence at slowing the likelihood of developing a dementia, but also we don't know what causes each type of dementia, so it is the best. We're trying, I guess, by doing these brain healthy activities. So exercising, and depends on which guidelines you read, but usually about at least 3 times a week of moderate intensity exercise, meaning you're building up a little bit of a sweat. I know from the Frailty Network, and maybe I'll ask Kaylee, there is some guidelines about making sure you do some weight activities as well. Socializing has been shown to be associated with the risk of developing dementia. So in theory, if we have a better social network and are able to utilize that, that risk will be diminished. As well as there is quite a bit of evidence out there in diet. I don't know if there is a diet that I can recommend at this time, but there has been some associations for things like the MIND diet, which is a specific diet, like the Mediterranean diet. Low like fatty meats has an association as well. So just trying to prevent the risk of developing dementias by doing those activities. The only thing I'll add here that I think is really interesting and also gives me hope, but it's not necessarily in the same ballpark as us, is there's quite a bit of research on longevity done by a whole different type of audience, so billionaires, etc. So I think like keeping an ear to the ground for some of those findings too. I'm not endorsing them because I think a lot of them are taken out of context and are probably not effective, but just making sure that, we are, being intercollaboratory and working with like all types of findings. I don't know, anything to add?
Well, just on the follow-up to that point, some of the very interesting research cross-culturally is on the blue zones, places in the world where people much more commonly live to be 100 and in good health through most of those years, and looking at some of the common factors in people's lives, no matter where they live, things like meaningful social connection, being like physically active throughout the day, again, healthier diets, and meaningful connection, for example, to religious groups or to meaningful community engagement. These are seen in these what are called blue zones all around the world. And it actually was on Netflix recently, too. You might have seen it if you haven't read the books. Dan Buettner is the author, if you want to read the blue zones. He has one on longevity and another one on happiness, the blue zones on happiness. So they're really fun reads and show you how all across the world you can have these common factors no matter what culture people are in.
I think one thing I'll just add, because that sparked the idea that in some of these areas where there is such longevity, there's also a place for older adults in society. And there's like respect and there's honor and there's like, they don't just stop after retirement and give up everything they did. So I think like from a reflection perspective, how we can create that, and maybe it'll be a little bit cyclical. We create an environment that wants to support older adults. We might have people living longer and with less dementia and vice versa.
Yeah, and the modifiable risk factors for dementia are about 35% due to lifestyle or modifiable factors. So it's quite a big percentage. I mean, if we had a pill that would diminish the risk of acquiring dementia by 35%, would you take it? I mean, it's quite a substantial reduction by modifiable factors.
And I would add, too, that for us, when my mom was diagnosed with young onset Alzheimer's, we were told that typically with young onset, it progresses more rapidly, and that we could expect she might be needing long-term care within 2 years of diagnosis. And it was actually 10. And I really do contribute that to how much we were able to keep her engaged and part of her everyday routines and activities and socializing with family and friends, and just really like having those joyful experiences, and very active. Like we were always hiking, and she even traveled after her diagnosis. She went on an Alaskan cruise, with family and friends with support. So
one more question for the doctors. I've heard mixed reviews on hormone replacement therapy and how it affects the chances of getting Alzheimer's. Do you have any input on that?
I can truthfully say I have not looked into that.
Yeah, I think it's an area that's under a lot of investigation. I don't think there's any final answer out on that. There's lots of risk factors. It wouldn't be in the top 10 that we know of right now, but that doesn't mean it couldn't be something that gets uncovered in the future. It's certainly an area of research.
Oh, and hearing.
Yes.
If you have diminished hearing, wearing hearing aids, one of the biggest modifiable risk factors.
And I have another question, actually a virtual question. Let me just pull it up here. Okay, so what is the main advice or knowledge that you would give for future care partners for individuals diagnosed with Alzheimer's? How can future healthcare providers best support, so this is healthcare providers, so I guess that's like a part B of that question. So looking at how family members can support their family members that are diagnosed, and then how can healthcare providers best support their patients to explore options such as memory cafes?
Well, just I would say one thing we try to do is to make sure that we share the information about this project, for example, with healthcare providers. So we try to have a network where we're engaging the primary care doctors. We send out posters and information to them so they're aware of it. So we hope that information is getting filtered down as well. But Kaylee, maybe you have some insights onto what helped you with your family.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. As both a care partner and a health professional, it was interesting going through that process on the other side of the coin. I think for everyone, the best we can do is to accept what the person tells us about their reality, and that their reality is their truth. So their experience is their experience, and we have to take that at face value, and we have to listen to them. I think everybody needs to learn a lot about Alzheimer's and different types of dementia, and how the changes that are happening in the brain really impact the experience of the world around them and can impact behaviors. Like when we were talking about responsive behaviors and what they mean, it's understanding that people living with dementia have unmet needs, and when we don't recognize those unmet needs, then we see these behavioral responses. They're a form of communication. So we really have to accept what people are telling us and be curious to understand what's underneath of that. I know something that was really difficult for our family about 1.5 years into my mom's diagnosis with Alzheimer's. She was also diagnosed with stage 3 bowel cancer and had to undergo treatment for that. And health professionals didn't want to see her as the whole picture. They were very focused on cancer because we're familiar with cancer, we know what to do with cancer. And she was only 52, so they were thinking, well, you want to do all the treatments, and you want to do the chemotherapy, and you want to reduce your risk of having it come back in 5 years by 15%, but not thinking about what that would mean for her Alzheimer's and how that would impact her experience living with that disease. Having a vulnerable brain, it was very likely to progress her symptoms much more quickly. And we had to advocate with her to help people understand that, because they're like, but you're only 52, like, why would you not want to do this? Because we're more than just one thing. Like, we're entire human beings. We are the culmination of our experiences, and we all have personal values and goals for ourselves. So I think as family members, as care partners, understanding what the person's goals are for themselves, how they want to live their life, how they want their disease process to go for them, and as health professionals, listening to patients, listening to care partners, trying to understand what this disease looks like for them and what they want, and supporting them to achieve those goals is really important.
I guess I can answer the healthcare provider side of that. I am part of the Human Resources Committee of the Canadian Geriatric Society, and for the past 3 years since the pandemic, the numbers of medicine residents who want to do geriatrics as their first choice has plummeted. So one of the only common things that brings people to geriatrics is that they have experiences in their own communities with their own families. And so going back to that social piece of having diversity in the people that we hang out with from a young age all the way up, I think is super key to creating a society where people can see themselves taking care of older adults, and then having those opportunities. Like, I think there's a huge geriatric presence here at Dalhousie that wasn't necessarily at the medical school I was at, and so everyone in medicine has to rotate through geriatrics. The medical students, I think, also have to, and I think that is one of the reasons why our program is full. But again, programs across the country are not full. So if we can also foster some of those programs, we might have a little bit more interest. And then some of the research I do is on like social isolation when you come to the emergency department. And we have asked people living with dementia and their family members, like, what do you wish that healthcare providers would know? And it's right back to what you said, Kaylee. It's like, I'm a human being, right? I wouldn't be here if I didn't need care. This is the care that I need, which is basic human support. And there is nowhere else that I can get that. So even though our hospitals are task-based, they're siloed, having just friendship, good food, something to occupy time, like, those are all things we can provide in our healthcare system for a population that's changing. This is our population that we're serving, so we should not try and serve a population that doesn't exist, of just like younger people with only one problem.
And I think in Nova Scotia, I mean, we have the honor of having the highest percentage of people over the age of 65 in the country. I think it's 22% now. So it's creeping up to a quarter of our population is over 65. So hopefully we're all going there. Hopefully we're thinking about the kind of communities we want to have. And so the healthcare really is not about the walls of the hospital or the clinics. It's also about thinking about our own communities and how we can make them age-friendly and what we can do to make it a good place for all of us as we get older.
We do have one more question. Oh, we have one in the room. Okay.
Hi. Yeah, a question for Dr. Cassidy. In terms of the Memory Café, I'm just kind of wanting to get a little bit more of a sense of what it looks like. And I mean, do they typically, is there like a toolbox for the structure? So are they kind of structured similarly? Are they typically open every day? Are they open certain hours of the day? Are they actually in cafes? Are they in existing cafes, maybe? So I'm just kind of trying to wrap my head around all of that.
Yeah, Thank you for the question. Yeah, so they are in all sorts of places. If possible, we like them to be in community cafes. For example, the one in Wolfville-Kentville that I can go to is in an actually existing cafe, Charts Cafe in Wolfville, and has been since 2019. People come in. It's for all around the province. We offer like a 5-session series that is run once a month through the winter and the spring, and it's usually on a Tuesday afternoon, maybe 2:30 till 4 kind of thing. And people come in, they relax, they get their cup of coffee. Usually we have a go-round with art that's to promote inclusion within the group. Do you like this painting? Do you not? This year our theme is Maud Lewis, so we have Maud Lewis art that is delivered as laminates to each cafe so that everybody can see them and pass them around. And they're paired based on the theme. Some of these emotional needs of people living with memory challenges and dementias, so that hopefully as the group gets to know each other over the course, the conversations can get a bit deeper. So that's sort of the way it's set up. Usually we have live music. In winter months we also offer some online live music and interactive art. This year we had saltwater painting with Holly Carr in January, and everybody received their art kit at home, and she was online, and some of the groups met and did it together, and others were at their kitchen table. And coming up in February, we have a Beatlemania kitchen party, for example, with Matt Martin on guitar, and he's going to do some Beatles tunes. If people are meeting in their groups, we'll have treats. It's Valentine's week, so it'll be, usually there's treats. So yeah, it's kind of like that. And then after the music, usually there's informal time for people to chat and stay if they want to talk or if there's more specific issues that they want to share. Does that answer it? Okay. Yeah. So some of them are not held in cafes. Some of them are held in assisted living settings. Some are held in churches. Some are held in basements. Really, wherever someone can find a space that is open and generally, low cost or free, that's what we're looking for. But it's always great when it's a running cafe, because that really helps to break down the barriers, because you just have people coming in and out of that cafe, and it just feels very much part of the day of the cafe. Mm-hmm.
I think we have time for one more question, either from our audience here this evening or from online.
Dr. Cassidy, how would you go about dealing with someone that doesn't really want to help? You can plan things, they cancel at the last minute. You try to get them to do things, doctor's appointments even, they'll call and cancel them themselves. They just don't want to seem to do any better for themselves. So you try to get them active with other social activities, and you plan things and then they don't do it, and then they're not a social person anyway. But when they are around people, they're fine and they seem happy, but then it's just trying to get them to go there. And it's been very difficult because we don't know where to start, what to do with them, because they're just miserable. And they try to make you miserable. Doesn't seem they're not happy until you're miserable. So it's a vicious circle, and you're trying your best to do everything, but they cancel everything that you do. So it's so frustrating.
Yeah.
Where do we start?
Yeah, thank you for that really beautiful question. I mean, we're all a bit tricky as humans, aren't we? Lots of us don't do the things we might know are good for us every day even, right? So honestly, I think, as Kaylee said, just starting where someone is really a great place to start. So, if someone really consistently doesn't seem to want to go out, maybe just you showing up and putting on the kettle and having a cup of tea and giving them a little bit of eye contact is really where they're at. And who knows, maybe when the weather warms up, they'll let you take their arm and go out for a little stroll or something, I think, just keeping hope that your presence matters to someone, I think it does. Actually, a lot of the data on social connection isn't about going out and doing stuff. It's actually about knowing that someone has your back. So that is about a kind of attachment, a feeling that someone is there for you. And so you just caring about that person, even if you don't get, even if you're not joining the badminton club anytime soon, I think your presence probably matters a lot.
Thank you so much. I think that's all the time we have this evening. Thank you for your thoughtful questions and comments, and thank you for your beautiful, insightful answers. For any questions that we did not have a chance to address, we invite you to call our confidential dementia helpline for support and resources. And wow, we covered a lot of ground, and we hope you all enjoyed the event this evening. I want to thank our phenomenal panel of speakers for engaging in this dynamic public dialogue on important research and awareness topics. Thank you to each one of you for sharing your expertise. And I hope you all agree that we certainly have heard about hope in action here tonight. On behalf of the Alzheimer Society, I have a small token of appreciation. And please join me in a round of applause again. Events like this come together with the support of many helping hands. Big thanks to the many Alzheimer Society staff members who are here this evening and have worked behind the scenes for a number of weeks and months leading up to tonight. Thank you for ensuring we have had a successful event. And hats off to our tech support, Basil AV, and the wonderful team. The wonderful team here at the Woodlawn Public Library for opening their doors and welcoming us in for this important event tonight. I also, before we leave, would like to take a moment to mention some exciting events on the horizon. This year's IG Wealth Management Walk for Alzheimer's is happening on Saturday and Sunday, May 24th and 25th, in 10 communities across the province. Please save the date and plan to attend if you're able to. You can visit www.walkns.ca to learn more and to register your team. And Andre, a member of our philanthropy team, is here tonight if you would like to ask her any questions. We're also pleased to recognize students pursuing dementia research in Nova Scotia by offering our Student Research Awards. 3 awards are available for undergraduate and graduate level students. The call for applications is now open and submissions are due by March 16th. So if you know of any budding researchers or students interested in dementia research, please let them know and visit our website for more information. Last but not least, thanks to each of you for joining us on this January evening. It is clear there is an appetite for more discussions on dementia research and advocacy. It was our privilege to explore these hope in action topics with you this evening. Thank you for your engagement. We hope that you have found a new resource, made a new connection, or perhaps you're leaving with a new outlook on dementia. Although we are at the end of January and Alzheimer's Awareness Month, the need for education and support for people affected by dementia continues. We are here for you. Please reach out if you have any questions or need help navigating programs and services that could support you. Our trained and professional dementia helpline staff will guide you. This is a final big favor from each of you. Please be sure to take a moment to provide some feedback on tonight's program, either online or if you are here in person. If you're online, there should be a virtual option for you to complete the feedback, and if you're here in person, you should have or hopefully received the evaluation form as you entered the auditorium. Your insights are incredibly valuable as we plan future educational events. Please feel free to visit our resource table at the back of the room if you did not yet have a chance to do so, and to enjoy a few refreshments or mingle and chat. If you have any questions for the staff as well, I know they'd be happy to answer them. Be safe, take care on the drive home tonight, and we look forward to seeing you again, hopefully very soon. Thank you.